Hi, I'm Dan. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Welcome to the very first video. And I'm a sound engineer. I am not as seasoned as some of my colleagues. I've been doing it for 5 years, but I'm quite an enthusiast and a musician. So I try to put everything into my work, and I think that I have reached the point where I feel comfortable to sharing some of my know-how. But of course, I'm open to learning. So if you have comments on my work, please do leave them below in the comment section. I love to learn and I love to discuss new and alternative ways of doing live sound. So today I will walk you through the general setup that I do every time. Some tips and tricks. Today we're in the local club where we have a pop punk band. Maybe you will see some. Maybe you will see some the recording of the concert. If Lukáš will not be too busy doing lights, and actually will shoot some of it. And yeah. This is a guitar amp, and it's very loud. This is a mic, and it's miking the amp. I like to put the microphone somewhere between the cone and the edge of the speaker. You cannot see it, but sometimes if you use a lamp or something, you can actually see inside. So it's good to find a spot in between, because the cone is usually quite harsh. But every sound guy will say something else. Some people used to mic the cone right in the middle, but it gives you very high-end sound. So maybe it's better for, I don't know, metal or something like that. But I don't like that sound, so that's why I'm trying to avoid using that. Sometimes if you have enough microphones, you can mic up 2 speakers and pan them left and right. It creates fuller sound, let's say, a stereo image. However, you can cheat this a little bit. That's what I do, because I don't have enough mics on hand today, pretending to have more mics at home. And you can patch it to 2 different channels and delay the second channel. It's a terrible idea to do this on a recording, because it's going to create phase issues. But if you're using it only for live sound, then you can get away with it, because you have the stereo image. There's no mono summing, so you don't face the combing issue with the phase shift. So that's what I do. One thing to note, to remember, the delayed channel is seemingly less loud to the listener, even though it's technically the same loudness. The perceived loudness is lower, so it's good to remember, if you have 2 guitars like I have today, and if you want to use this to your advantage, to pan it the way that this one is more prominent on the right and the other one is more prominent on the left. So actually on this one I'm delaying the left channel, and on the other I'm delaying the right channel. One thing you'll probably come across with, and I struggle with most of the time, is that guitarists like to show their amps to people. So they place it like this, and it's facing the people. But of course they're standing up, so they can't really hear it very well. So they crank it up, and then you basically have nothing to mix, because the sound from the amp itself is so loud that it's very hard to manipulate it in the mix. So it's usually good to talk to the guitarist, be kind, because of course they want to show, their best. But if you're kind enough, I think you can always communicate with them and tell them to either lower down the volume or turn it the way that they can actually hear the amp and not the people. So for example, turning it on the side, like 90 degrees, for example. So let's talk about drums now. So here, drums is extremely versatile and complex instrument. You can do a lot of things while miking with some softer types of music like jazz, blues, and so on. You can get away with just a few mics, just a kick mic and an overhead microphone, because generally the music is not so loud and you don't need the thump of the toms and so on. By the way, if you have a very good condenser microphone on top, like I have here, the SE7, it can capture low frequencies as well quite nicely. So actually, you don't need, if you're looking for like a low frequency tone for the toms, and you don't have a loud environment like we have today, you can get away with one condenser microphone to capture the overall kit. It's no problem. But be careful because you cannot amplify it as much and so on. So really the music has to be very soft for that. Today I'm using the classic rock technique where you use each mic for each drum and one overhead microphone. And to be frank, the overhead microphone is just for the, first of all, the drummer to know that I'm doing something, it looks good. And second of all, I'm recording it, so then I have the sound of the cymbals. However, we're in quite a small club, and the cymbals, they carry very well. Plus, we have so many microphones on the stage that the sound of the cymbals is caught by all these mics on the stage, and it's amplified, and there's no need for the overhead microphone per se. When you talk about toms, it's good to position the mic so that the back of the mic is facing towards the nearest cymbal. And that is because, generally speaking, all these mics are cardioid. Not always the case, some are hypercardioid, and you can have figure of 8 and so on, but 95% of microphones will be cardioid. So that means that the back of the microphone rejects sound. So it's good to position them, the back of the microphone, away from the nearest cymbal. That's what I do. That's why I angle the mics a little bit. I don't overdo it. It's when you see, when you look at the position, I'm actually not positioning the back of the microphone directly towards the cymbal. It's just like slightly off axis. I don't know if it helps much, but I try. The problem is if you, here for example, the cymbal is right next to it, not behind it, but next to it. So you sort of cannot do what I just described. That would be sort of impossible. Then you would not capture the drum. So I'm just trying to find the middle ground here. When it comes to where it points, on the toms, I like to point it more towards the rim because it captures more of the membrane, the low end and the rumble, and less of the hit, of the attack, which is something that with the toms I want. However, with the snare drum, I'm doing the exact opposite. I'm pointing it at the middle because I want the attack, I want the snap, and I don't want so much the sound of the membrane. Today I'm not using a second microphone to mic the bottom of the snare because I don't think it's entirely necessary, but sometimes it's good and brings more color to the snare drum. But today I'm not doing that. The kick drum, I am actually miking slightly differently than I would want to because the stand here is quite tall. generally it's good to put the mic inside, like all the way inside, because it captures more low end and more the high end click. But if you have a good microphone, and you can just stick it right to the port here, as you can see, and it does a good job anyway. There's no problem with this positioning, but maybe you're not getting so much low end as you would want. But you can always tweak it at the desk. So when worst comes to worst, you can get away with it this way. So bass these days, bass is less and less mic'd up because for stage use, it's sort of you don't want that because the bass amp is very imperfect. Generally, the PA system is much higher quality and it gives much smoother frequency response, so you can EQ the bass the way you want if you get the clean signal. Clean meaning straight from the instrument. So that's why we don't actually mic up the bass cabinet. When you have a higher end amplifier like this one, it has DI output. DI means direct inject, so basically you get the clean sound. Before it gets to the box, it sends it to you, and then you can shape it in the board. So that's great. If you have a cheaper one, a cheaper amp, it usually has at least line out, which is just a jack, and you use a DI box to convert the signal, and then you plug it to the desk. So vocals. There's really not much to say to vocals. Maybe one thing, it's good if a singer brings their own microphone, because first of all they spit in it, and that's not very hygienic, and you can disinfect your vocal caps. I mean the windshields after each use, but nobody does that, let's be frank. So it's not very hygienic. So if they have their own microphone, don't force your own microphones on them. Even though you have better microphones, it's generally better for them to use their own. First of all, it's more hygienic, and second of all, they're used to the sound. So your microphones can be better however you feel, but to them, they're used to their own microphones, and to them it's going to be less stressful, and more they can focus on the performance because it's their mic. They practice with it in the rehearsal room, and then they bring it to the stage. And one more thing about vocal, and why I think each singer should have their own mic, is not only because they should choose the mic that suits their voice best, because not every singer sings the same way. Maybe you've noticed, if you're experienced, or a little bit at least, you've noticed that one mic sounds perfect on one vocalist and terrible on another. And then you doubt your mixing skills. Well, of course, most of the time you have only one mic and you have to use it for everybody. But I think that singers should have their own microphones, because it's like their instrument, right? Their instrument is their voice. And this is what amplifies their voice. So they should buy their own and have their own. It's like if you had a guitarist come in and say, I have a guitar, but I don't have an amp. Well, you can borrow some amp from them if you know beforehand, but it's not going to sound the way they want, probably. Or it's at least not going to be as good as it would be if they had their own amp and fine-tuned it and were familiar with it. So that's, I think, the same logic. If they have their own mic, they chose a mic that suits their voice, and they're used to it, and they should bring it, I think. So let's hope that in future it's going to be a standard. So far it's not. But So it's slightly different for back vocalists because usually they don't care so much if you know they sound good or. I mean, they probably care, but the audience doesn't care generally. So usually they don't bring their own mics like today. But the main vocalist today has their own, so that's I think good practice. Still, I wanted to talk a little bit about your approach as an engineer to the band. I have come across many professionals who think that they are the star of the show, and if the artist asks for something, they just say, well, that's not possible and you don't understand it. And I think it's important to note that you are here to shape their sound and make them comfortable because they are the star of the show. So I think it's important to listen and to be kind to them and ask them if they're satisfied, and if they say no. Actually, a lot of artists are even a little reluctant to tell you if something is wrong, because they generally need to deal with jerks. I mean, okay, not generally, but I've met a few, and so I think it's good to ask them, like, is everything good? Would you want me to shape something different, and so on. And with that actually comes a rule that I've learned quite late, and I think is very important and good. Actually, I just realized that today I violated it, but okay, who cares? When you do the sound check, start with vocal mics, because it's extremely important to keep the conversation between the engineer and the band. And I think in the industry there's quite a standard way of miking up and sounding instruments, the way that you start with drums and bass and guitars and pianos and saxophone and everything, and the vocals are the last to mic. So actually the artists, they cannot communicate with you. They cannot tell you that they want something or that something is wrong. And I think that's not very helpful. And it doesn't really change anything. You can start with the vocals, and why not? And then you can talk.
Jdem na to! Moc vám děkujem! A skáčem! Mám jednu známou a ta ví, co mám rád, když s jejím tělem večer můžu si hrát. Mám jednu známou a ta mě pomůže proměnit toho kluka ve mně na muže. Vždycky mi říká, ty moje zlatíčko, ty moje lásko, ty moje sluníčko. Teď zase v pátek budu sama